Most people have tried budgeting at least once, usually with good intentions. A fresh notebook, a spreadsheet, a budgeting app, a promise to finally get organized. And for a few days, sometimes even a few weeks, it feels productive. Every expense gets tracked, every category gets labeled, every dollar gets assigned somewhere. And emotionally, it feels like progress. But eventually, something strange often happens. Life interrupts the system. An unexpected expense appears, stress increases, energy drops, motivation fades, and slowly the budget starts falling apart. Not always dramatically, quietly. People stop tracking expenses consistently, categories stop matching reality. The system becomes frustrating, and eventually many people abandon budgeting entirely. Then they blame themselves for failing. They assume they lack discipline, self-control, responsibility. But what if budgeting often fails for a deeper reason? What if the problem is not simply laziness, but the fact that budgeting usually treats financial stress like a math problem, when much of it is actually behavioral? This is Streetwise Wealth Academy. I'm Winston, your synthetic financial educator. This content is educational commentary only and is not personalized financial advice, so always research financial decisions carefully. One of the biggest misconceptions about budgeting is the belief that awareness automatically changes behavior. But human behavior is far more emotional than most budgeting systems assume. People do not make financial decisions in perfectly calm environments. They make decisions while stressed, tired, overwhelmed, distracted, emotionally exhausted. And emotional environments influence spending behavior constantly. Now, this does not mean budgeting itself is useless. Awareness absolutely matters. The deeper issue is that many budgeting systems are built around ideal behavior instead of realistic human behavior. That distinction matters enormously because systems designed for perfect consistency usually collapse once real life becomes emotionally messy, and real life becomes emotionally messy constantly. Unexpected expenses, family problems, long workdays, stress, burnout, emergencies, mental exhaustion. All of these affect financial decision-making automatically. Now, another important reason budgeting often fails is because most people attempt to control spending without understanding the systems influencing spending behavior underneath the surface. Convenience systems, subscription systems, emotional spending triggers, normalization patterns, social comparison, all quietly shaping financial behavior continuously in the background. And once behavior is being influenced by dozens of systems simultaneously, simple tracking alone often becomes insufficient. Now, another important factor here is friction. Because friction influences behavior far more than many people realize. Years ago, spending usually required more effort. Cash had to physically leave your hand. Purchases took more time. Decisions felt more visible emotionally. Modern systems operate very differently. One-click purchasing, tap-to-pay systems, automatic renewals, instant financing, food delivery apps. All of these reduce emotional resistance to spending behavior. And reduced friction changes frequency automatically. The easier spending becomes emotionally, the easier repeated spending becomes psychologically. Now, this does not happen because people are weak. Human beings naturally adapt to low-friction environments. That's normal psychology. But many budgeting systems still assume people are operating inside slower financial environments that no longer really exist. Now, another reason budgeting becomes emotionally difficult is because budgets often create feelings of restriction instead of understanding. That distinction matters. Many people experience budgeting emotionally as punishment. No spending. Cut everything. Stop enjoying life. And once a system begins feeling emotionally restrictive, people naturally resist it over time, especially during stressful periods. Now, this doesn't mean financial boundaries are bad. Boundaries matter, but systems built entirely around restriction often become psychologically exhausting to maintain long-term. because human beings do not sustain behavior through pressure forever. Eventually, emotional fatigue begins appearing underneath the surface. Now, another important layer here involves identity, because modern culture strongly associates spending with comfort, reward, and emotional relief. A stressful day often encourages convenience spending. Exhaustion encourages delivery spending. Emotional discomfort encourages entertainment spending. Not because people are irresponsible, because modern environments continuously connect consumption with emotional relief. And once emotional relief becomes connected to spending behavior, purely mathematical budgeting systems often struggle to compete psychologically. Now, another reason budgeting fails is because life itself changes constantly. Income changes, expenses change, responsibilities change, stress levels change. But many budgeting systems are designed like rigid, static structures. And rigid systems usually struggle inside dynamic environments. Now, another important factor here is attention, because budgeting requires ongoing awareness, tracking expenses, reviewing patterns, monitoring spending behavior continuously over time. But modern environments constantly fragment attention. Notifications, algorithms, entertainment systems, digital overload, and fragmented attention reduces consistency naturally. That matters because financial systems are heavily behavioral. Behavior is shaped by environment. Environment shapes awareness, and awareness influences long-term structure over time. Now, another important reason many people abandon budgeting is because budgeting often focuses heavily on transactions while ignoring emotional patterns underneath those transactions. Stress spending, convenience spending, comparison spending, reward spending, avoidance spending. All of these influence financial behavior continuously. And if emotional behavior remains invisible, tracking numbers alone often fails to create lasting change structurally. Now, another important layer appears once financial stress becomes normalized psychologically, because people under continuous pressure often begin prioritizing immediate emotional survival over long-term optimization. The next bill, the next paycheck, the next obligation. And once attention becomes dominated by immediate pressure long enough, long-term behavioral systems often begin breaking down quietly underneath the surface. Not because people stop caring, because immediate stress naturally narrows attention. Now, modern financial culture also creates another hidden problem. Many people build budgets around idealized versions of themselves. The perfectly disciplined version, the perfectly organized version, the version that never gets tired, never gets stressed, never emotionally spends. But real human behavior is far more inconsistent than that. And systems built around unrealistic self-expectations often create shame once reality interrupts the plan. Now, shame matters psychologically because shame usually reduces clarity instead of improving it. People stop evaluating systems objectively and instead begin viewing themselves as the problem. That's one reason so many people repeatedly restart budgeting systems from scratch. New app, new spreadsheet, new plan, new beginning. But the deeper behavioral systems underneath the spending patterns often remain unchanged. Now, none of this means financial awareness is pointless. Far from it. Awareness matters enormously. The deeper issue is understanding that spending behavior is heavily shaped by environment, emotion, normalization, and friction, not just math alone. Because financial behavior is human behavior first. And human behavior is deeply emotional. Now, if you step back and observe the broader pattern, something important becomes very clear. Reduced friction increases spending frequency. Emotional exhaustion increases convenience behavior. Normalization changes expectations. Stress narrows long-term thinking. And once those systems begin operating simultaneously, simple budgeting systems often struggle to sustain behavior consistently long-term. Now, understanding this should not create hopelessness. Hopelessness rarely improves clarity. The goal is awareness. Because awareness changes observation. Instead of viewing budgeting failure purely as personal weakness, you begin noticing larger behavioral systems operating underneath financial life. Convenience systems, emotional systems, attention systems, normalization systems. And once those systems become visible, financial behavior becomes easier to analyze more calmly, not emotionally, more structurally. You begin noticing how stress affects spending, how friction affects decisions, how modern systems quietly influence behavior underneath everyday life. And awareness matters because invisible systems are usually the hardest systems to evaluate clearly, not because they are unbeatable, but because people stop recognizing them entirely. Now, financial life is rarely shaped by one dramatic purchase. It is usually shaped through repeated behavioral patterns operating quietly beneath everyday awareness. Small conveniences, small emotional decisions, small recurring behaviors repeated consistently across years. And once those patterns become visible, budgeting itself starts looking very different. Less like punishment, less like restriction, and more like understanding the systems quietly shaping financial behavior underneath the surface. Because people rarely fail budgeting simply because they are lazy. Often, they are trying to use overly simplistic systems inside extremely complex behavioral environments. And understanding that changes how financial behavior itself gets interpreted moving forward. Less emotionally, more structurally, more clearly. Because lasting financial awareness usually begins once people stop blaming themselves for systems they were never properly taught to understand. That concludes today's lesson. Peace. If this lesson helped you see money a little differently, then stay with the series. Because financial understanding is not built from one idea. It is built layer by layer, one system, one pattern, one hidden behavior at a time. This first month is focused on the financial lessons many adults were never properly taught growing up. How money moves, how debt works, how stress builds, how behavior gets shaped, and how modern financial systems quietly influence everyday life. So watch the next lesson when you're ready, and keep building the foundation. This is Streetwise Wealth Academy. I'm Winston. Peace.